Hi, Joshy. You ask, aside from internships and studying for exams, is there any way for me to prepare for becoming an actuary as an undergraduate and the skills I should be building at this point as a freshman in college? You seem to like what you've done a lot and have prepared from the beginning of college to get to the leadership and experience you've attained now. Well, that's not the case. No way. I was a mess as a freshman in college. First, I was surprised that I'd gotten admitted. I panicked and thought I'd best work my butt off. All these other guys were there who had either been valedictorians of their high school class or who were extraordinary in some other way. The school was Princeton. No crap. And how? I wondered, have I ever gotten in through the gates? Then, at midterms, something magical happened. I got outstanding grades. Wow, I thought I overestimated this place. I started to chill out and have some fun. My grades went down, but I still got by. Remember, I was a freshman, so don't expect me to have been mature. I decidedly was not. It's sometimes embarrassing now to think back on how many extraordinary opportunities I wasted then because I didn't fully appreciate the privilege I had been given. My mind was on girls and all sorts of distractions. Instead of reading for class, I would read the book on a subject that had just caught my interest. There were all sorts of things I wanted to know, and there were so many books to help me follow those interests. I kind of coasted along until the spring of my sophomore year. My first 2 years of college were in engineering. I'd spent one particular, but which turned out to be pivotal, afternoon in a laboratory measuring the strength of concrete blocks. Now that's very important for engineers to know. No one wants a building to collapse under its own weight. But at 4:30 p.m., after 3 hours with those concrete blocks, I returned to my room to find my roommates still in heated discussion over a morning lecture on the Renaissance and Reformation. The lecture was given by Jinx Harbison, a consummate scholar and teacher. My goodness, I thought, these guys are getting an education, and I'm crushing concrete blocks. The next day, I initiated a shift in major from engineering to the humanities, specifically European area studies. I was afraid to jump right into a full history major. History was considered formidable, and I lacked the prerequisite survey courses. Area studies allowed a historical focus with diversification into other humanities. I was fortunate to be allowed to start with junior level history courses after R.R. Palmer, the head of the history department, decided I could handle it. He had given me a stack of books, including his own, to read over the summer, followed by an informal oral exam in the fall. I've never regretted that shift into the humanities since then. History and literature absorbed me during those last 2 years. Moreover, the faculty in the humanities were far more interesting than those engineering guys. My guess is that the best minds in engineering are out building great things. All that the best minds in history can do is to stay in the university and teach. After I graduated, I thought it would be easy to find a job. After all, I was young and energetic and eager to work hard and learn. You mentioned interns. I never worked as an intern. Why would I? I like to get paid, and I don't like to give away for nothing what I can get paid to do. I had found my first working job in high school putting fertilizer on the carnation beds in a local greenhouse. Then I had wanted adventure, so I found a summer job working in a silver mine in northern Ontario. I lived then and grew up in New Jersey, so going up to Canada and northern Ontario was quite an adventure. During the school year, I worked shelving books in the local library. And after I got to college, I continued to work in the university library. The jobs didn't pay much, but they paid something, and that was enough for me. After my freshman year, my German teacher found a job for me in a textile factory in Westphalia, and I earned enough to pay for my own passage on a student sailing sponsored by the Dutch government. The ship was the Gouda Beer, which was spelled like beer, but which meant Great Bear in Dutch, but which fit the reputation for the Heinekens on board, and we had lots of that. There were 800 students on the crossing, 500 girls and 300 boys, a great ratio to stick with what's great. We managed to run through all the beer on the ship during the 10 days that old lumbering Liberty ship took to reach Rotterdam. That was fun. I also learned a lot about relationships with girls and how it's best not to juggle more than one at the same time. Now, I don't know what you watch on TV, but if you watch Bachelor in Paradise, you know that I was then, like Bachelor in Paradise's Blake, turned loose at Stagecoach. That'll make sense if you watch the show. And if you're not familiar with the show, ask your girlfriend or your sister. One of them must have watched the show. They can explain how that comparison with Blake works out. The work in the factory in Germany was okay, but I learned more just from being forced to speak a foreign language and from trying to fit into a culture that had different norms and expectations than our own. For instance, I was paired with a boy 3 years younger than I. I was then 18 and he was 15. But he was already a full-time employee in an apprenticeship program. He attended classes only in the afternoons, but worked the rest of the time, and he was mastering the craft, electricity, which he would pursue for the rest of his life. But I digress. After sophomore year, I was short on money to pay for college. My folks could only afford so much and no more, and the cost of tuition was rising. So I took a job digging holes in people's front lawns for the local water company. Ditch digging paid well and was hard work. I also found that it takes real talent to dig a hole with straight walls and to find a lost water shutoff valve. There are great lessons to be learned from working underground in a silver mine, or in a European factory, or from digging a presentable ditch. This is basically how I got through college. And then suddenly I was married and had graduated, and I was expected to find a job and support a household. But there was a catch. There was a recession that year, much like the recession that took place after 2008, though this was some years before. I couldn't find a job. First, I tried door-to-door sales. That was not my calling. When people were hostile toward me, and most people were hostile when they came to answer the door after I'd knocked, I felt that they were right, even as desperate as I was. Then I got a job to sell life insurance. It paid me a minuscule draw against future commissions so I could study for the agent's licensing exam, which I passed, and to memorize a sales speech, which was supposed to work wonders with all people I could get to agree to an interview. I hated it. I felt like a predator, trolling for unsuspecting gullible victims to persuade them to buy a product that they probably needed, but which was, perhaps, not the top priority for their means. That job didn't last long. I was in despair. But during the weeks during which that despair had begun to settle around me like a dark black fog, I remembered the actuarial exams. I had had a friend in fifth and sixth grades whose father was an actuary. My friend and his family had moved to the United States from Canada when the father was hired by Prudential to head its life underwriting department. The father had given me a little booklet from the Society of Actuaries, which had 2 sample exams with questions like those for the first 2 actuarial exams. Armed with that conviction, i.e. the passing exams would be far easier than trying to sell life insurance, I sent letters of application to about 10 life insurance companies, most of them in New York City. The rejection letters came flooding back. The one company invited me in for an interview, and I went. They wouldn't hire me into their actuarial program because I hadn't been a math or actuarial science major, but they did offer me a much lower paying underwriting job with the understanding that I could take the exams and have the same study privileges as their actuarial students. The underwriting job proved to be one that I loved. I got to work with salespeople and to make well-reasoned business judgments. I also studied for exams and started a family. The first full years I was able to study for the exams, I passed the first 3 exams, the most I was allowed to take under the Society of Actuaries rules, more than any of the higher paid actuarial students passed that year. That was a moment of triumph and brought with it a welcome jump in pay, which was sufficient to cover the cost of my now soon-to-be 3-person household. Not long after, however, I was told that since I was now on the actuarial program, I had to do purely actuarial work. Whoa, Nelly, that was no fun. I lost the contact with people and was expected to spend the day buried in worksheets. I soon decided that much as I liked the cozy environment of an insurance company, I wanted a chance to be able to interact with people. So I changed jobs and left insurance for consulting. Well, that's enough to answer most of your questions. The long and the short of it is that I didn't prepare for leadership. I simply followed my heart and my passion wherever it led. My goal wasn't to be a great leader. My goal was simply to make enough money to have a family and a normal life. The idea of living in the suburbs in a nice house with a dog, all that stuff. The actual exams were demanding, and the memorization and mastery they entailed gave me lifelong knowledge. That is valuable understanding for all business enterprises, but particularly for long-term insurance-type undertakings. But I didn't take the exams for that reason. To be honest, I took them because they offered a path for me to be able to take responsibility for the family I was now forming. I needed to earn a living, and the exams assured us an income. They said that if you passed the exam, you got a raise, and if you passed them all, you got an income that enabled a reasonable living standard. So I took them, and I passed them. To be totally candid, the knowledge I gained from history has been far more valuable for my career, but mastery of the actuarial material is both necessary and essential. Along the way, my interest in history developed and blossomed and grew, and I wanted to pursue that in addition to the actual work that I was doing. Because I lived in New York City, after I took that job with a New York insurer, I was able to go to graduate school in history in the evenings while taking the actuarial exams. I found that alternating between my history reading and coursework and exam preparation was a perfect way to school my brain to absorb more and to reach higher levels of human understanding. Juggling those studies with a demanding job in consulting and later as an officer in an insurance company was a bit daunting, but overcoming that challenge helped greatly to grow me as a person. I wish you well. At your age, I was still very juvenile. Sounds like you're far more mature than I was at that age, and that's super. You will have a wonderful life journey ahead of you, and I wish you all the very best.